Hi there, welcome back, and it is chapter 16. Ochek, Eric, Morgan, and Eli left without much more than they'd had with them on their journey to Ochek's trapline. Their packs were filled with materials for their dwelling, eating utensils, extra clothing, something that would have been useful when Morgan had lost her mitts, food, a small shovel, and so on. Musqua had asked them to take more rations than strictly necessary in case Eric was wrong, and they found themselves stuck deep in the white time, with a long way to come back, and no food to sustain them. Ochek refused to put the village at greater risk. "I haven't hunted in this direction for years," he said, "and so there might be more game." One condition that Ochek had agreed to, at Eric's request, was that if they came across game, it would be of the four-legged variety. "If they talk, they walk," she'd said. "I mean, they walk like they get to leave. Get it?" "Yes," he said. "I understand." They headed south, as they had previously, but southwest rather than southeast. It made Morgan wonder if the villagers had ever gone north, across the barren grounds to hunt. There were woods there, too. If there were woods, there might be game, even if, as on her world, it got colder the farther north you went. Besides, they all had fur, didn't they? But she decided questions about that would have to wait for another time. The weather was cruel again, and having a conversation while walking through it wasn't going to do any good. For the better part of 2 days, Morgan couldn't see what was different in this direction to keep beings from Mississauga away from it for so long. Years, Ochek had said. The trees were thick and tall. The snow was deep and soft and undisturbed. There were no tracks. It wasn't until the wind started to blow more aggressively on the second day that something began to feel different. It rudely elbowed through the oak and pine trees and caused snow to drift higher than any one of them thought possible, as high as a house back in the city. This, in turn, required the group to take long detours. Morgan realized that the trees were beginning to thin out, and the fewer trees there were, the harder the wind blew, and the higher the snow drifted. When they came to the end of the forest, Morgan finally understood why it was that no one came this way any longer. A long and wide field stretched out in front of them, at least as imposing as the barren grounds. And in the distance, a mountain range stretched as far south and north as you could see. The highest peaks reached to the heavens, and even the lowest points looked hard to climb. The mountains looked like a line of sharp and crooked teeth, as if anyone who tried to cross might get eaten alive. They huddled together at the edge of the forest to shield themselves from the wind, with the great field in front of them and the mountains beyond. By this time, the sun was setting, light giving way to dark. "We can't stop here," Ochek shouted over the wind. He slipped his pack off, took out pieces of dried meat, and handed one to each of the group. "We have to keep going until we reach the base of the mountains. At least there we'll have shelter." "Too bad," Eric said. "This is a wonderful place for a picnic." "I can see why you didn't go out on your own," Morgan said to Eric. "Are you kidding?" Eric said. "It's stupid to go with 4, never mind 1. She stuck the meat in her mouth and started walking through the field. "But if we don't start moving, we'll become our own little mountain range." She was right. In the few minutes they'd been standing there, the snow had already started to creep up higher around their bodies. If they stayed where they were, they'd be swallowed up by one of these snowdrifts. "You sure this is the way?" Ochek called out to her. Even the great hunter sounded hesitant about what lay ahead. "I should hope so, shouldn't I?" she called back. It felt as if hours had gone by when Ochek stopped. By now it was night, the sky was clear, and the stars and moon painted the snow in a shade of light blue. Morgan, who had been trailing behind, taking advantage of the path the other 3 had cut through the snow, arrived last. "Oh no," she said when she saw what had stopped Ochek. It was the same canyon they'd crossed before, but this time there wasn't a felled tree to help them across. It was far worse. A narrow bridge of ice lay in front of them, frosted with snow at the edges, but like glass down the middle. A gust of wind, a wrong step, and Morgan pictured herself slipping and falling. She got on her hands and knees, crept to the foot of the bridge, and slid her hands over its surface. It was very slippery. "How did this even get here?" she asked. "Like, it's a literal ice bridge, really?" In the book she'd read, it would exist only because of magic. But while there were talking animals on Aski, she was pretty sure there were no ice queens sleighing around, manifesting Turkish delights to tempt little boys. Referring to Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe. "I'm not sure," Ochek said. "It has been here since the arrival of the white time." "Pardon me, I usually love a good mystery, but it's getting colder." Eric walked to the foot of the bridge. She turned to the group with a smirk, then got on all fours. "See you on the other side." Just like that, she sprinted across the bridge like an actual squirrel and made it to the other side before anyone could take a breath. "You should be especially careful," Ochek said to Morgan before he, too, went on all fours and scampered across with little trouble, only a bit more slowly and less gracefully than Eric. "Thanks for the tip," Morgan shouted over the wind. She inched forward again until she could hang her legs over the edge of the canyon on either side of the bridge. She pressed both hands against the surface and was about to shimmy onto the ice, but she stopped and looked up at Eli. "You know, nobody would blame us if we just turned around and decided to live." "We can't just leave them," he said. "You know we can't." Morgan looked at the two animal beings standing at the other side of the canyon and watched them intently. They seemed to care for the humans, and Morgan had to admit to herself that she was starting to care for them as well. "You're right," she said. "Plus, I'm not so sure I could find my way back, and Ochek has all the food anyway." She let Eli go first again. He went the way Morgan intended to go, on his butt, straddling the ice, and pulling himself forward bit by bit. Morgan did the same, right behind him, concentrating on the back of his head and not looking down. "There is no canyon, there is no canyon, there is no canyon," she thought, all the way across. When she got to the other side, she let out a huge breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. Nobody paused to celebrate. They kept on. The foot of the mountains was close, and the travelers were weary. Thankfully, even now the wind was softer. The snow wasn't as deep, and it turned out to be the easiest part of the journey. That is, until Ochek and Eric knelt down up ahead. They seemed to be involved in some sort of conference, which made Morgan feel very curious. When she and Eli caught up to them, the two animal beings were inspecting a set of animal tracks. Morgan bent down and looked at the prints herself. She was no tracker, but she knew well enough to tell that they weren't left here by a two-legged being. "They look like they're from a dog or something." Eli looked at them as well. "No, they're from a wolf, right, Ochek?" "Eh," Ochek confirmed. "They're from a wolf." "I'm sorry?" Morgan said. "A wolf?" Eli said. "No, I heard him," she said. "I just feel like I'm going to pee my pants." "Oh my," Eric said. "Your legs would get so cold." "It was a figure of speech," Morgan explained. "So you're not going to—" "No," said Eli. "She's scared. So am I." "Then I, too, may pee my pants," Eric said, "but not actually." "Enough." Ochek stood and took out his knife. "Children, walk close to each other and close to me." I think maybe I'll do the same thing," Eric said, and she even took Ochek's paw. Before long, they came to the base of the mountain range. Their pace had quickened after finding the wolf tracks. There was a good spot to camp, where a rock face offered more protection from the wind, and they constructed the hut in record time. All four of them huddled inside, and Eli started a fire for supper. The meal consisted of more dried meat and broth, but it was good to put anything in their stomachs. Ochek took the occasion to make tea for the group, a mix of pine needles, melted snow, and tree sap. As tea went, it was rather bland, like old peppermint gum, But Morgan wasn't about to complain about the warmth that it offered. And it had more taste than dried meat, that was certain. Is that why you haven't gone this way before? Eli asked. Because of the wolf? Ochek took a sip of his tea. When I came this way a long time ago, trying to find more food for the village, I came across the bridge and the beast. I was too weak to try to fight it, so I left and I never came back. Excuse me. But if something happened to you, Misawa wouldn't survive, Eli said. Ehe, Ochek said. It was either be eaten or, if by some miracle I defeated the wolf, get over the mountains, probably find nothing but white. Then I'd have no strength to get back. The outcome would be death no matter what. Is the wolf a two-legged animal? Morgan asked. It was walking on 4 legs, Eli said, judging by the tracks. It was walking on 4 legs when I saw it too, Ochek said. We can do that though if we like, Eric pointed out. Yes, we can. Ochek took a bite of dried meat. I know it's not from Misawa, that's all. And if it can walk on 2 legs, well then it could talk, is that right? Is 2 legs better than 4, or is it the other way around? Morgan asked. I don't know. Ochek put the last bite in his mouth and chewed it thoughtfully. If it can talk, it can think to set some kind of trap for us. If it can't, it will go on instinct, and I'm not sure that that's better. Should we just sit here and wait for it to kill us then? Morgan immediately wished that she hadn't asked the question. What if they agreed? Then what? Leave in the middle of the night? The dark made her feel empty, lost, afraid. 1 wolf won't take down a group of 4. When it was only me, that was different, Ochek said. We'll be safe tonight. We need the rest. Morgan felt relieved. With no wind pummeling their hut, the occasional sound was more pronounced. The crackling of the fire, one of the 4 chewing meat or slurping broth or tea. Yawns. One time Eli shifted his body and his back brushed against the hut. Morgan jumped because it sounded like something was outside. Eli admitted it was him and received a light punch on the arm. When the fire died down and the meal was done, it was quiet. But even though she was bone tired, Morgan couldn't sleep. She couldn't stop picturing a wolf charging into the tent, its teeth bared. She needed a distraction. She forced her thoughts away from the predator and searched for any topic at all that would keep her mind occupied, at least for the night. The question she'd had earlier occurred to her. Do you ever go north? To the woods, you mean? Ochek asked, propping his head up, eager to talk. Perhaps he couldn't sleep either. In fact, they all rolled onto their sides, eyes wide open. Yeah, Morgan said. I mean, that's all I could see north of Misawa anyway. No, Ochek said, we don't go into those woods. But there could be lots of animals to catch there, right? She asked. I doubt it, Eric said. Why? Morgan asked. Because of the barren grounds? It's not the barren grounds, Ochek explained. It's what's beyond the great tree. Morgan leaned forward, waiting for Ochek to elaborate, but he didn't. Well, what's beyond the great tree besides woods, she asked. More wolves? Ochek exchanged a glance with Eric. Morgan tried to read into it, but couldn't. Hello, Morgan said. You're fantasy creatures, not mystery characters. Excuse me. Stop it, Eli said. They don't want to tell us. Oh, come on, Morgan said. We're risking our lives for them and they can't tell us what's in the stupid forest? You don't need to know everything all the time, he said. Well, yes, I do, she said. And if we get through this and keep living together, you better just accept that about me. Oh, I like her, Eric said to Ochek. Thank you, Morgan said. Look, Ochek paused and breathed hard through his nose. There is a giant in those woods, the oldest 2-legged one on ASCII. Nimistapu? Eric whispered, as if saying its name out loud might summon it. Morgan had been scared of the wolf. By the looks on the animal beings' faces, to them, Mistapu made the wolf seem like a bunny rabbit. Well, are you going to tell me what that means in Cree? Morgan asked Eli. Ochek just said it, Eli said. Giant. Oh, of course, said Morgan. Stupid me. There are stories of a time when a group of villagers crossed the barren grounds to hunt, Ochek began. They set up camp outside a forest, at the base of the great tree, ready to enter the northern woods the next day. In the dead of night, Mistapu came into their hut. Though it's a giant, it moves like a ghost, and even the best hunters didn't hear it. It took the soul of an elder, Kihu, and warned the others never to return. We never have. Well, what happened to Kihu? Eli asked. A tear fell from Ochek's eye. He never woke up. Wait a second, Morgan said. What do you mean it took its soul? How? Where did he put the soul? Nobody knows, Ochek said. But that's what Mistapu does. It takes your soul and leaves only flesh and bones behind. It makes you who you are. What makes you who you are is gone, and you are left in a dreamless sleep until you pass away. Like a coma? Morgan said. And Eli asked, well, what if you found his soul? Well, then it would be released, Ochek said, and he would travel into the happy hunting grounds. Morgan grumbled. Well, that doesn't sound so happy. Have you even looked for the soul? Eli asked. Ochek shook his head solemnly. The fire reflected in his eyes. We've never gone back to the northern woods, only to the tree line. That's how I was able to find you at the great tree. Not another word was said that night. Even Eric had nothing smart to say after Ochek's story, and Morgan wanted to know nothing more about the northern woods, or Mistapu. Eli added the last of the wood to the fire so that it would burn out during the night, leaving embers to keep them warm until morning. Morgan was distracted from the wolf, just as she wanted to be, but her plan had backfired. She did not sleep any better. She just stared into the fire, and at some point, as the flames died, her consciousness mercifully slipped away with them.